So my name is Lynn Lee, and I'm the founder of a company called Society 9. It's a modern femme sports brand providing boxing gear and sportswear to empower women in their fight.
My name is Ryan Buchanan, and I am founder and CEO of Thesis. We're a digital and creative marketing agency and work with brands like Adobe and the world's, I can't say their full name, but the world's largest athletic shoe company here in Beaverton, Oregon, as well as a bunch of other consumer brands.
So Society 9 became a MESO client about a year ago, and MESO is a really incredible organization, especially for women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color. I feel like the way that they assess businesses owned by people like me and run by people like me, as well as our risk, is inherently different and more fair than traditional banking. You know, I didn't personally grow up in an environment of generational wealth both literally as well as wealth of capital networks and so forth. And I graduated as a millennial with student loans. So, you know, like a traditional bank looks at me and says, okay, well, what do you have that you can leverage? Or that they can leverage. And MESO really doesn't look at things exactly in that way. They look at things much more cohesively about the human, the merits of the business, the opportunity, what can the owner or owners give back to the community if this business succeeds. So there's, I think, the important macro elements of that assessment, and then there's the micro, of course, which is like, yes, is this a business that can be sustainable and so forth. But I think that's where MESO has been such an important community player in everything that's happening in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and I'm just really grateful to be a client. I think just knowing, especially because, you know, Ryan's gone through his own dips and hills and valleys of his own journey, it's really important for someone like me who's so new in my own journey to just feel like, okay, I'm not crazy for going through what I'm going through. And just having someone not only have the empathy, but also be like, no, I live this, or even be able to say, no, I experienced it even worse, so you're doing great. You know, it just further affirms like what it is that I'm doing. 'Cause there's so many times in the founder journey where you're just like, why am I doing this? There's plenty of times where you ask yourself, like, maybe it's time to throw in the towel, but then you remember that there's other people who've lived through similar challenges or even harder challenges, and it just makes everything worthwhile, and it also makes you feel like you truly aren't in the ship alone, even if it feels like that in the day-to-day. So
I'm inspired by how, you know, how sharp you are, how nimble, how hungry, and you've got like fire in your belly and you're getting after it. So it's pretty awesome.
I've always operated on a mindset, of course, of falling on my own sword, because that's what you have to do when you're a business owner. You know, your employees get paid first. You're the last one out of the office. Like those are all really important tenets, I think, to leadership. But leaders are humans too. And I think sometimes, like when it comes down to making those really heavy decisions, it's really difficult to do that alone. So I think for me, the mentoring is really important, for the affirmation, sure, of course, but also because, yeah, there are decisions sometimes where I don't have the answer, and maybe other people wouldn't have the answer, but at least we can play off of each other's leadership compasses and say, well, this is what my compass would direct me to, and here's why. So I think that's a form of camaraderie in of itself.
My hair's getting a little messed up, so sorry, it's really windy out here. I'd say the two specific things that have brought me the most joy in this mentoring relationship both ways is, one, there was a time when Lynn's wearing so many different hats at the stage of company that they're at. She's literally doing it all. She has a great team, but one of the hats was, connecting with her community through email. And there's another entrepreneur friend of mine who was doing these weekly emails that it was really kind of more his entrepreneurial journey that he was sharing with all of his customers and things like that. And so I just thought it was an opportunity for Lynn, sometimes when you're an entrepreneur, you think everything needs to be really polished, and even as scrappy as you are, I think you were trying to put forth, really polished, photography and imagery and all that, instead of sometimes just humanizing the brand with just telling your story through email, through social media. And so it was just really fulfilling that conversation led to action. And then the second piece is, on the nonprofit side of things, I am newer in my journey as far as started a couple nonprofit initiatives. One's called Emerging Leaders, another is called SIGN, which is short for Survival is Not Enough. And the tangible things that I can get from Lynn of where she is and how well she presents to investors, and not only put some materials together, but just really explains the business model and the reason why behind it and the vision of where she's going. I'm learning how I can take that and bring that into how I can do that for raising money for some of these, being a social entrepreneur. So there is equal value exchange, and we're both kind of mentors to one another in different ways.
My relationship with Ryan is really unique because I sense and feel his curiosity. I sense and feel his willingness to be challenged, to be uncomfortable, to be confronted with these things. And I think as a woman of color, it's really important for me to feel that, especially in business environments, leadership environments, capital environments, wealth environments, where, yes, it is historically predominantly white men. And that is the conversation right now. And so I go back to what I said about transference of power. If you really care about Black Lives Matter, if you really care about creating systemic change, if you really care about challenging racial inequalities, and if we're talking about the context of entrepreneurship, then we have to talk about transference of wealth. We have to talk about breaking cycles of implicit bias that prevent entrepreneurs of color, women entrepreneurs of color, from getting funding, especially since the system is already in place with traditional banking or whatever to prevent us from advancing. So I think that's another reason why this mentoring relationship is very unique, because I do feel and see that Ryan understands his place and also understands that this is a learning journey together, and that is such a huge step for allyship. I don't think it's enough to just say, you know what, your people hurt us in the past, I don't want anything to do with you. That feeling is warranted. I know there are a lot of people in the community who feel that way, and it's warranted.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad we're having this conversation on race and gender and how that relates to entrepreneurship and power. And, it's such a powerful conversation. And I think a lot of people who look like me, and when I kind of started on this journey around racial equity with real intentionality, and about 6 years ago, I was super fearful that I was going to say the wrong thing, and that I, just taking the first step into this with publicly talking about it, a lot of the mindset is like, oh, there's only downside, not upside. But that's the wrong way of thinking, because I've had such a richness of relationships and growth, and I think the solution is definitely relational. It is proximity to people who are not like you, and having what may start as an uncomfortable conversation, but it gets easier the more you have it and you get deeper into it. And so a quick story that I would tell of just this aha moment of really realizing my white male privilege was just at a business event in Portland with 90 business owners in the room, and a lot of them my friends. It wasn't my event, but of the 90 of us, 85 of us were white and male. And it just was like, I don't know why I hadn't, had the aha moment 10 years prior, but it was about 6 years ago. And in that moment, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not doing anything about this. And my company reflects the fact that I haven't been intentional about forming relationships in communities of color and creating a more welcoming place in my company. So I started that journey with literally the next day writing a blog post, Portland business community, too white, too male, and the call to action to that was to start this nonprofit to have other CEOs sign up to have an incredibly talented college student of color intern at their companies. And that has since grown to almost, this summer we'll have over the past 6 years, over 500 really talented Oregon college students of color interning, and 40% of those get full-time jobs at companies. So I think it is about relationships far more than it is about money, although that's helpful. And it's about access to networks, like we talked about, access to capital, and it's about sharing our journeys and sitting in the muck of uncomfortableness of, I don't know how to talk about this, but that's where the beauty comes from. And so I'm really encouraged that this conversation's happening.
For me, because I'm so fortunate to have mentorship relationships with people like Ryan, a couple of other business leaders, I do have an advisory board. I'm very, again, fortunate and lucky to have that. So those relationships remind me of where my place needs to be in giving back. So, I've worked with a lot of different Vietnamese student associations, being keynote speakers at events, making myself available to answer questions if they want to email me. And, it goes back to that word access. That's a very in vogue word right now, but it's important because, to Ryan's point, aside from the capital, which is very important too, the other side of it too is just the access to a valuable relationship. When people talk about degrees of separation, that is specifically why when we talk about the demographic makeup of who gets funded in venture capital and, why are most entrepreneurs mainly white and male and have a certain pedigree. If you look at the layers of that, that is access to collegiate networks, maybe SAT tutors, maybe that's somebody knows another person who's a family member and alumni of this. It's all networks. And so if you grow up a janitor's daughter, where's your network? So that's what I think about, and I think about transferring what I've been able to receive and transferring that down to people who look like me, people who don't look like me either, but just knowing and understanding how much that web has to start being built early on. So, I do think a lot about my time working with high school students, college students, even MBA students, or people who have no degree and are bold and just want to go for it, want to start a business. Whatever I can do to transfer my own knowledge, because I've been a recipient of so much information and so many different networks, that's what I can give. And that's why relationships with people like Ryan in my life are so important, because I do know what kind of an effect that does have in the likelihood of my success. And I don't even necessarily mean financial, I just in general, the continued progression of my success.
Yeah, so for me, I was really fortunate actually through EO to meet a good friend in Sue Embry, who she and another good friend, Ben Sand, and I co-founded an initiative called Sign, Survival is Not Enough, that we actually just launched a few weeks ago. It's been in the making for over a year, and it's really about closing the racial wealth gap and about career development, really through a lot of accessing networks. And the way that it works is professionals of color between 22 to 35 years old who are looking to, grow their career and also, literally grow their personal wealth. They're meeting in groups of 9, and mentors like Lynn and me and other entrepreneurs and other managers out there would mentor in those small groups around our journeys, around what has worked for us, and also open up our networks. And the participating members, these young professionals of color, have to go through a 5-week personal finance class taught by a professor of color at Portland State, and really like get a level playing field of the language around insurance and 401k and all of the financial things. And that network, everyone wants to be involved in this. Employees, CEOs, we all want, there is a much greater community of people who want to lean into having proximity to people who don't look like them. Oftentimes people don't know where to start, especially white people. Like we don't know how to start the process. And there are organizations like Emerging Leaders, like Sign, where built around mentoring, that is really the start of something beautiful that I think will grow to thousands of people being involved in it. And I think, a lot of people watching this video could get involved that way.